Welcome to this time of reflecting together on fundamental issues, both in the human condition and in the world of spirituality. After all, they belong together. The duty of one is to illuminate the other. Today, the focus of our attention is on the two trees of the knowledge of good and evil. An overwhelming majority of Christians throughout the world are of the impression that there is only one tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that is a tree found in the second chapter of the book of Genesis, verse 16, where God shows to Adam a particular tree and says that you may eat of the fruit of any other tree in the garden, but of this tree, the fruit you shall not eat, for this is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The other tree which Christians do not know, Christians either do not know, have completely forgotten, or chosen to forget, is found in the 24th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Matthew, verse 36. Matthew 24:36. Now, obviously, this is not a tree anymore because, with the passage of time, with the progress in history, what was once a symbol has now become a disembodied, abstract reality. Now, this verse pertains to the curiosity of the people around Jesus, including his disciples, and particularly his disciples, to know specifically when the end of time will come. It's called eschatology, science concerning the end of times. So, the New Testament counterpart to the Old Testament tree of the knowledge of good and evil is this curiosity regarding the end of times. When will the present scheme of things end and something radically different come into being? And notice that with respect to both, there is an interdiction, there is a disallowance of complete knowledge. In fact, a certain degree of illegitimacy or impropriety is evidently attached to the curiosity to master knowledge of this kind. Now, obviously, this has been grossly misunderstood, misinterpreted. It's been interpreted, particularly the tree of knowledge of good and evil, has been interpreted as a kind of divine warning against expanding the horizon of knowledge. That's not it at all. In fact, the true spiritual meaning of the tree of knowledge of good and evil is, and this may surprise everyone who listens to me, is that one must keep a space or a niche, N-I-C-H-E, a niche for skepticism in the garden of faith. Please understand. Our life of faith is incomplete without unbelief. This may sound shocking because it's so unfamiliar. Belief without the discipline of unbelief is extremely dangerous. It makes individuals vulnerable to manipulation by others. True healthy spiritual discipline involves two things. One, we must believe. An agnostic, an unbeliever, an atheist, one who is totally and instinctively negative about metaphysical realities, obviously cannot be a believer, and he cannot be also a full-fledged human being. At the same time, one who is willing to accept anything and everything that's packaged to the name of faith will also become a complete sort of unbeliever. In fact, a dangerous unbeliever, because what he practices is not belief or faith. What he practices is blind faith, which is the exact opposite of spirituality. So that is the reason why in the pure spiritual vision of the scriptures, belief and unbelief cannot be separated. Now, if everything is believed without any circumspection, without any sifting, winnowing process, then nothing is believed. So, in order to preserve the integrity of belief, it is necessary that a certain degree of skepticism is practiced. For example, God has given us certain faculties, the faculty of understanding, the faculty of discernment, the faculty to gather information, to process, to proceed from data to knowledge to wisdom, wisdom to discernment, and in the process also develop divine intuition, spiritual intuition. It's a whole complex of extremely powerful faculties. These are talents to be invested. These are talents to be utilized and perfected. And all these talents are critically relevant to the life of faith. Now, for example, there is an immediate illustration of this in the 3rd chapter of the book of Genesis. After all, the serpent is sitting on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Please understand, right? Now, the serpent is saying something to the woman. What is he saying? He is saying, look, if you eat of the fruit of this tree, your eyes will open and you will become like God. Now, that's the time precisely that Eve should have exercised the spiritual responsibility to be skeptical. She should have asked, is there any logic to this idea, this insinuation, that by eating a small fragment of what God has created, anyone can become like God? Is it possible at all? It is such a stupid idea, and yet it seems so attractive, so powerful, so irresistible, only because this discipline of unbelief, this discipline of responsible skepticism is excluded from the picture. What seems to be so overwhelming a temptation. In fact, I've had many young people tell me, look, how can Eve be faulted for falling into the trap of Satan? Because anyone else would have done the same thing in her position. Yes and no. As long as you do not factor this healthy discipline of responsible unbelief or skepticism, what you're saying is correct. But the moment you introduce the saving grace of responsible skepticism, well, it's such a stupid thing. Now, this is the reason why. Now, it has got all sorts of amplifications. Since I also want to go into the New Testament and look at the second tree of the knowledge of good and evil, I'm going to take leave of it at this point and move straight to the New Testament. Now, in the New Testament, it doesn't appear to us in the form of a physical tree. It appears in the form of knowledge. See, in the Old Testament, it's a tree of knowledge. By the time you come to the New Testament, the tree disappears and knowledge remains, and knowledge remains suspended somewhere out there. So it is disembodied knowledge. In the Old Testament, the Garden of Eden, it was embodied knowledge. Knowledge which had a form, the form of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In the New Testament, there is no tree. There is only knowledge. And knowledge concerning what? Knowledge concerning the end of times. When will the world end? That's what people want to know. Now, there is a common factor to both. As regards the Old Testament idea of knowing good and evil, and the New Testament idea of knowing the end of times, when will the world end, there is a common factor. The common factor is that knowledge of this kind, whether it's the Old Testament or the New Testament, cannot be based on any evidence. There is no foundation. There is no material, empirical, concrete foundation. At that point in time, as far as Adam and Eve are concerned, how would they know good and evil? Because there is absolutely no foundation for it. But there is a far more subtle issue here, and that is, there is a very good reason then and now that people should not be given certainty regarding good and evil, or let me bring back the idea of skepticism. there is a healthy reason why every person in the domain of religion must practice this healthy discipline of responsible skepticism vis-a-vis every aspect of religion and every aspect of life, because what happens then is that in the pursuit of good, evil will be generated. A classic illustration of that is the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Surely the high priest of Judaism, the Sanhedrin, which was the legislative body of the Judaic religion, as well as the vast body of believers who heeded their views and clamored for the execution of Jesus Christ, they all believed passionately, without any shadow of doubt at that point in time, that what they were doing was eminently good. In fact, they believed it was a sacred duty. And it seemed so because they did not leave a margin for doubt. And that's what Jesus actually focuses when he says they did not know what they were doing. So, the same problem exists in the Old Testament, and because it's a very foundational issue as far as humankind is concerned. For other animals and birds, it's not relevant. As far as human beings are concerned, this is critically, vitally important, because every evil in this world, every excess out of religious zeal, political zeal, social zeal, cultural zeal, whatever, every atrocity, every inhumanity, every form of organized atrocity, injustice, arises out of one's cocksureness about the knowledge of good. At the point of doing something, even the most inhuman, unthinkable thing, the persons doing that, they'll have to persuade themselves to believe that what they're about to do is the most eminent good imaginable. For example, people who participate in communal rites in India, you ask any one of them. Let me give you a concrete illustration. In the year 1999, a young man called Dara Singh went with about 100 people, all actually school-going children, and set fire to the two jeeps in which a wonderful Australian missionary called Graham Staines and his two children, Philip and Timothy, were sleeping in a village in Orissa called Manoharpur. It's a cluster of villages, some 14 villages. They had gone there to participate in the local forest festival, and they used to visit this area twice a year in order to distribute medicines, because in this region there was no clinic, there was no hospital, there was no medical service of any kind. And the only way the local people got some relief, some medicines, was from this missionary, and he used to go and visit them, and he used to identify himself with them. He learned the Santali language, a very difficult local tribal language. He used to compose hymns in Santali, set them to music and teach them. In fact, when I went there, the local people came together and sang those hymns. That's why I know these things. Now, why did this young man called Dara Singh kill such a noble soul like Graham Staines? Because he was made to believe that Christian missionaries are a threat to Hinduism, and their agenda is to eradicate Hinduism from the land of its birth. He ardently believed it. If you read the Justice Wadhwa Commission report, which was the commission of inquiry constituted to look into this matter, the inquiry very clearly states that at the time of doing it, this young man, who was a Bajrang Dal activist, Bajrang Dal is one of the affiliates of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, or RSS, or Sangh Parivar, is a militant wing of the RSS, and he ardently believed that it was his moral duty to eliminate this threat to his religion and his religious culture. So at the point of doing this atrocity, Dara Singh did not have the slightest idea that what he was doing was wrong. Rather, he believed that what he was doing was good. There was no distant shadow of evil upon it. And this problem arises because of one's cocksureness about what is good and what is evil. This is the reason why God, in His wisdom, chooses to maintain a very large degree of ambiguity. I'm using a technical word, ambiguity or uncertainty about good and evil. If you look at history, if you look at the historical evolution of our species, you will find that what was considered good at a certain point in time began to be recognized as evil. For example, there was a time when kingship, one man ruling thousands of people and all of them deeming themselves his subjects was considered a good thing. There was a time when feudalism was considered very good, and now it's considered a bad thing. There was a time when keeping women suppressed was considered a good thing. It was considered a necessary thing to safeguard the health of a home, because if women are given freedom of movement, God knows what will happen. There was a time when it was considered a good thing to deny educational opportunities to girls. Today it is considered an evil thing. So ideas of good and evil have changed. They keep changing. They must change. But if you believe that dogmatically this particular thing is good and good now and good forever, then you create a whole lot of problems. In fact, you even arrest the progress of history. The issue is as serious as that. Now come to the New Testament, the second tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In this case, the good and evil gets contracted to just one thing. When will the present scheme of things end? When will the world end? And what is the good and evil there? The point is this. Obviously, when Jesus is approached for this information, that demand is couched in a particular form, if you pay attention to it, and that is, they want this information to be imparted to them as a matter of, note this, privileged information. Privileged information. What is privileged information? Information or knowledge that I alone have and you don't have. Now, what's the problem when somebody enjoys privileged information? The problem is very simple. A person who is in possession of privileged information will use it only to manipulate, control and exploit others. And surely you know that this has happened in history. Many fraudsters, many religious charlatans appear in the past, and I can remember at least half a dozen of them, who claim to know that they had very special revelation from God as to the end of things. And signs are very clear. And it's absolutely certain that the world will end on the 15th of July 1962. So many people got carried away, especially women. I don't know why women are particularly vulnerable to these things. And they all parted with their gold, because these fraudsters told them, look, if the world is going to end, what will happen to your gold? It will only melt. So please give your ornaments to us. They all parted with their gold. And these experts in eschatology disappeared overnight, and all these people who reposed their trust in them were left looking foolish and aggrieved. And I can recall at least 6 different periods during which this happened. But if tomorrow somebody comes with the same fraud, thousands will fall into the same trap. So please understand that whenever someone comes to you with the claim of enjoying privileged information, his intention cannot be honorable. So what people need, or what people required of Jesus Christ, was to give them this very special information that nobody else would have. In that case, it's like, striking oil in the Middle East, black gold, tremendous. You don't need anything else. So such knowledge is bound to be abused. In fact, it will only be abused. Now, the third thing I want to say, and this is now the heart of my argument, and I have to say that I owe this understanding, as you might be surprised to know this, to my very limited understanding of Buddhism. I would commend to my viewers just to break a little out of this very tiny little cell in which we have been consigned. Keep your eyes and minds open to things around. After all, God created this wide, beautiful world. Now, in Buddhism, there is this idea that we must avoid excesses. For example, do metaphysical realities exist? Yes, they exist. Can metaphysical realities or metaphysical issues be unraveled? They may be unraveled, but I am not very sure. Even with regard to metaphysical realities, the Buddhist position is, yes, they may exist, they may not exist. As far as I am concerned, that's not much of an issue for me. My issue is that I want to sort out my relationship with the present reality, and in dealing with the present reality, what really helps me is this kind of the cultivation of a fair degree of unbelief, which does not result either in orthodoxy or in agnosticism. The excess is orthodoxy on the one hand and agnosticism or unbelief on the other. Buddhism would say steer clear of orthodoxy, because orthodoxy is blind belief which leaves no margin for doubt. Agnosticism is blind belief in nothing, which is very absurd, leaving no room for any knowledge at all. So both are caricatures of reality. Reality is that it's like a river that runs between these two, and in order to relate meaningfully to this, one must not attach one's heart to anything that's part of this, even as we participate in this. Why? The reason is something I've already included in one of the previous videos. Human beings cannot derive any satisfaction, any fulfillment, any sense of security by depending on anything in this world, because everything in this world is passing and perishable. Everything in this world is limited, finite, and therefore human beings, when they bring their infinite passions, infinite needs to bear on these limited resources of the world, limited not in quantity but in significance, scope, then the result can only be frustration, the result can only be suffering or dukkha, and dukkha will blight or ruin your life. So maintain a healthy balance between the two. Avoid the two extremes of blind orthodoxy and blind agnosticism or hardened agnosticism. Leave a little margin for uncertainty in both. If you are located in the field of orthodoxy, retain a small pocket, retain the tree of unbelief there or skepticism there, so that you critically examine whatever is packaged and presented to you in the name of good, right? So notice that in this package or in this formula, knowledge of good and evil interpenetrate. Therefore, logically speaking, any good that is presented to you will also have potential for evil. And likewise, any evil that is presented to you at any given point in history will also have scope or potential for good. Now, if you're dogmatic about it, you will see only one side of it. For example, if you're dogmatic as a skeptic, which is a contradiction in terms, or as a hardened skeptic, you will see absolutely no good in this other side. If you're dogmatic as an orthodox person, you will see only good here and no harm. As a result, you will do a lot of evil under the mistaken notion that whatever is advocated in this area is all good, just of which, as I already said, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ is a sobering example. Now, you can think of many illustrations like that from the history of religions. So, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is an important aspect of life. It's our duty, not only as intellectuals, secular intellectuals or philosophers, it's our duty even as, or more so in the context of religion and spirituality, to be skeptical. Now, for example, and I'll close on this. If Jesus Christ did not practiced the discipline of skepticism or unbelief, what would he have done? He would have simply adhered mechanically to the settled stereotypical religious customs, traditions, and practices of the Jews. Did he do that? No. He maintained and practiced the discipline of skepticism. He was healthily skeptical of whatever the Jewish religious tradition prescribed and demanded of the people. He was also skeptical of all the stereotypical assumptions of the times. And in his interactions with people, he delivered them by challenging those stereotypes, assumptions, and presumptions. Right? And if you read the Gospels with this in mind, you will see that this is true of practically every episode recorded. Jesus also interrogated the stereotypes the Jews entertained about others, the Samaritans in particular, not just the Samaritans, but also the people of other tribes like the Canaanites and so on and so forth. The Romans, how he appreciated the faith of the Roman centurion, all these things we know. But somehow we don't have the critical tool to connect all this and think clearly to arrive at the truth of the situation. The truth of the matter is, the great difference between Judaic religiosity and the spiritual discipline of Jesus Christ is that in the narrow track of Judaic piety and religiosity, there is absolutely no space for healthy skepticism or unbelief. Whereas in the spiritual vision and the discipline and the way of life that Jesus Christ exemplified, unbelief plays an extremely important role. It serves as the winnowing principle separating truth from falsehood or falsehood from truth. If Jesus were merely a Pharisee or a Sadducee, then there would have been no hope for the world, at least no hope for a person like me. So paradoxically, I can be today a man of faith because of my unbelief. And those Christians who believe that piety is nothing but behaving like parrots and monkeys, imitating whatever is done by others, conforming mechanically to whatever is required of them, they are not Christians, they are Jews. And they reject the historical mission of Jesus Christ. And this is a very serious matter, that's why I thought I would draw your kind attention to it. Please give this a thought. I know I've not been as clear as I should have been and perhaps could have been. But please remember that because these are insights that pertain to not the day-to-day experiences of human beings, there will be a certain air, an aura of nebulousness or vagueness about them. But that should be accepted as a challenge for each one of us to personally apply our minds to it and to sort of pursue them through practical experiences as well, or specific concrete examples, and attain the fair degree, the desired degree of clarity one would like to. So on this I close. Please remember that there is not one tree of knowledge of good and evil. There are two trees, except that the second is not a tree in the physical sense of the word, but the essential idea exists. It's knowledge without the tree, because now the tree is Jesus, right? So the tree answers will not come from a tree. Answers will come from Jesus, and that Jesus maintains the ambiguity of the Old Testament tree, and he says that when the second coming will take place, when the Son of Man will come again, it's not even given to the Son of Man to know in advance. That's why I drew your attention to the 36th verse of the 24th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Matthew. Even the Son of Man does not know. In other words, in the grand scheme of things that God created in His perfect wisdom, God has appointed and ordained this margin of ambiguity, this margin of uncertainty, so that nobody can claim privileged information and use it as a ruse to deceive and exploit fellow human beings. And therefore, it's a very healthy thing. And from that, the wider ramifications of this pattern must be sought and understood, incorporated into our spiritual idea and our practice. Only then do we become the followers of Jesus Christ. Thank you very much.